Many deep places of this world are guarded by the Minotaurs, whose glassy eyes betray little more than animalistic cunning and bloodlust. Half man and half bull, these monstrous humanoids hunt down those lost in their labyrinths in cruel, protracted rituals that are treated as little more than games. While not every Minotaur is ruinous, and not every community belligerent, they are nevertheless a source of terror and woe that betides many adventuring travelers. When a Minotaur charges, death usually follows. Greeting, stranger, and welcome back to the Learned Pig. This will be my last reading from the Hitchhiker's Guide to Golarion for now, because I need to make my way to the Sallyport in Westgate to depart on my next tour. But I first wanted to take the chance to educate you about Minotaurs. Why? Well, for two reasons. Firstly, they are a fascinating species, with a history and culture that has developed out of legend, and secondly, they have a unique presence here on Starstone Isle. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that Kortos could be the place on Golarion with the highest density of Minotaurs per unit of land. There are over 40 known communities, with dozens more individuals stalking their hunting grounds here. Indeed, if you were to ever get lost beyond the settlement's borders, then you run a surprisingly high risk of running into one's lair. Thus, I think it is in our best interests to understand the Minotaurs before we sally forth. So, let's begin. The general outline of a Minotaur is readily recognizable, though most people do not appreciate how diverse in form they can be. All Minotaurs are very tall, bipedal, monstrous humanoids, distinguished by their bullish, horned heads and cloven hooves. Their torsos are usually muscular and powerful, resembling men's, yet they can also be covered in a shaggy fur that protects them from the elements. Most Minotaurs are surprisingly swift for their size, and capable of sudden bursts of speed, though a few are so heavily muscled and broad that they instead lie in ambush for their prey. Irrespective of colour, size, sex, or fur coverage, the head of a Minotaur is always topped with a pair of long, goring horns that they can use on instinct from a very young age. While Minotaurs are capable of speech, and many of them are partial to learning Jotun, among themselves they are just as comfortable exchanging grunts, roars, and glares as they are words. It is difficult to discuss these creatures without also examining their territories, which are always labyrinthine in nature. Be careful though, because any environment with bountiful prey that is confusing to navigate will suffice. Mages may place Minotaurs into true labyrinths to protect their treasures, but you could also find them stalking dense forests, abandoned mines, and even city sewer systems. The more complex a network, the better for a Minotaur, for they are blessed with an extraordinary navigational instinct that prevents them from losing their way. I should stress that this is not magical, nor is it emblematic of their general intelligence, which I would note is otherwise relatively dull in wit and slow in speech. It is almost as though navigational logic is a component of Minotaur's wisdom, rather than their intelligence. Thus, they would not be able to navigate a maze presented to them on paper, but if deposited into its physical manifestation, it would not take them long to escape it. On the other hand, escape they might not, if it promised a steady supply of disoriented meat for their stomachs instead. Most Minotaurs are solitary creatures once they reach maturity, leaving their small family units and communities to seek their own labyrinths to stalk. That said, it is not unheard of to be pursued by a mated pair, or even a small gang of Taurian hunters, though such tales are quite rare, I expect due to the low survival rate of such terrible trials. A few Minotaurs forego their natural instinct to seek complex hunting grounds, and decide instead to launch direct assaults on outskirt villages and isolated travelers. When this happens, the Minotaur is called a marauder, and they can be a greater threat than their regular kin even without the advantage of a labyrinth. Minotaur marauders are the products of advanced communities, groups of small families called tribes, who use weapons, equipment, and advanced tactics, much like the other humanoid ancestries. These are put to use harvesting resources and livestock, which to Minotaurs includes other humanoids, to bring back to their lairs. Yet if the marauders of a Minotaur tribe forego the labyrinth in favour of raw power, then of even greater concern are those who reach the opposite conclusion. To some Minotaurs, their labyrinth represents more than just an instinctual home to gain an advantage. It is rather a system to be analysed, improved, and conquered. These Minotaurs, called the Tangle tenders, devote themselves to the manufacturing of hazards and traps, some of them incredibly complex and even mechanical, that can then be distributed throughout their lairs. They rarely confront their prey directly, unless it is to scare them into a rigged pathway, or to dispatch their wounded bodies once their energy has been exhausted. Luckily for us, Tangle tenders are quite rare, and there are two good reasons for this. The first is cultural. Minotaurs value cunning, but they value strength far more. There is a critical difference between an instinct to stalk prey and a directed intelligence to drive them into artificial traps. The second reason is simply practical. Most Minotaurs do not have the resources to create elaborate hazards throughout their lairs, and those who do are normally part of larger tribes, which in turn leads to greater cultural pressure against behaving in such a strange way. Still, Tangle tenders are tolerated by other Minotaurs, who have learned that dismissing their abilities will often lead to tragic accidents occurring deep within their own labyrinths. Now, I do not mean to portray most Minotaurs as mindless brutes. While full-scale tribes are the exception and not the norm, as they are with centaurs for example, those that do form are invariably forces to be reckoned with. Indeed, anywhere beyond Kortos, a Minotaur tribe is a cause for concern in the council chambers of any ruler, in no small part because it may mean that a prophet has united families under one banner. Unlike the shamanistic, primal religion of most centaur tribes, Minotaurs worship specific deities. In most cases, their prayers are heard by the goddess Lamashtu, called the Mother of Monsters. While the origins of Minotaurs are debated by scholars, many believe that it was Lamashtu who brought forth the first into Golarion. This she called Baphomet, who in life sired many offspring, and is thus under this theory the direct ancestor of every living Minotaur today. He was so successful that, upon his death, Lamashtu transported his soul into the abyss, wherein she fortified it into the demon lord with whom we are now familiar. Another legend states that the first Minotaurs were birthed by women in a small Aslanti village, which had been cursed by Lamashtu as punishment for rejecting a calf she had blessed with 2 heads. Horrified of their offspring, the villagers shut them away into a dark labyrinth beneath the hills on which they lived, and for a time they placed their faith in peace. Yet after many years, the fully grown Minotaurs burst forth once more and slaughtered their parents in vengeance before scattering across Aslant and eventually beyond. Well, whatever the truth may be, almost all Minotaurs revere Lamashtu as their goddess and believe that her clerics are worthy of respect. The demon lord Baphomet also strikes one as a fitting object of worship. One of his titles is even Lord of the Minotaurs. And indeed, the ruler of the Ivory Labyrinth is respected by almost all of his children, who acknowledge him as father and lord. However, while there are exceptions, one does not normally worship their own sire. Thus, Minotaur prayers are normally saved for the Mother of Monsters, even if her most infamous child is closer to them in form. Also, note that Baphomet is not a true deity, although he is strong enough to grant divine powers to those whose faith is sufficiently zealous. Regardless of deity, a Minotaur tribe uniting under the banner of a prophet is a grave threat to surrounding settlements. Its marauders are sent forth to raid the local area, while its home labyrinth is fortified by Tangle tenders to the extent that even their kin would struggle to pass its routes unscathed. There is little room for negotiation when a tribe is on the warpath, and even if there were, it would be a feat in itself to reach the heart of its community alive. Now, many cultures have legends of brave heroes traversing some impossible labyrinth to slay a Minotaur. But in reality, even recognizing that you have entered one is usually the first challenge. Remember that most labyrinths are primarily deep forests or underground tunnel systems, not signposted creations of mad kings with evenly high walls all perpendicular to each other. Thus, let us pretend for a moment that you have wandered unwittingly into a Minotaur's lair. The siphons, beneath Absalom's puddle district perhaps, or some forgotten area of the Immenwood. How would the Minotaur hunt you? Well, you must recognize that this game is a long one. Minotaurs savour flesh that has been terrorized, and the longer you spend navigating its territory, the more fatigued you will be in the final confrontation. And yes, there will be many. In fact, it is quite likely that the Minotaur would confront you almost immediately in an attempt to startle you deeper into its territory, away from the entrance you used. Faint charges and penetrating roars would stalk you until you were sufficiently disoriented for it to leave you to escape the maze on your own time. Meanwhile, it would shadow you relentlessly, denying you the chance to rest or even eat. If by some miracle you were able to find your way to an exit, you can be sure it would interpose itself between you and it, confronting you at the very end of your journey in the hope that your resources would be at their lowest. If you were unable to find an exit, then your torment could last for several days, until you could almost beg for death at the end of one of its goring horns. Therefore, if you are capable of confronting a Minotaur in combat, it is best to do so immediately before it has a chance to turn the hunt in its favor. As I have mentioned, most Minotaurs are not particularly intelligent, and in a fight they rely on brute strength above anything else. If you can dodge its wild swings and avoid its bull rush charges, then there is little it can do to harm you physically. Of course, I say this all along with a caution. If you encounter artificial traps in an area, then you must prioritize escape above combat. A labyrinth prepared by a Tangle tender heralds not only deadly devices around every turn, but probably also Minotaur reinforcements from its heart. I would like to end by qualifying this general education with knowledge that is specific to Kortos, for much of what I have said on tribes does not apply on this island. You see, the Minotaurs of Kortos mostly descend from a great army brought here through a portal by the warlord Varadni Voon in the year 23. His might was terrible, for he corralled centaurs, minotaurs, and harpies under a single banner, whereas all these species normally hate one another. At this time, the god Eridan still resided in fledgling Absalom, and he personally led the defense of the city and slew the rampaging warlord. He then caused an earthquake that broke the portal and scattered the remnants of Voon's now trapped army. Declaring the threat ended, Eridan permitted all survivors to remain on Kortos, and their descendants still dwell here today. This shared history between the city at the center of the world and the Minotaurs continues to shape a unique relationship. For one thing, the worship of Lamashtu has been rejected by many of the tribes here, who favor Baphomet directly instead. This is not necessarily comforting to the citizens of Absalom, but Baphomet's edicts and tenets are generally regarded as marginally more palatable than his mother's, for they are designed around secrecy and subtlety more than terror and depravity. Furthermore, the tribes here on Kortos are more socialized to other humanoid settlements than tribes on the mainland, so there is a degree of mutual understanding between them and Absalom. So long as the tribes do not hinder settlements under its jurisdiction, the city will tolerate their presence. This is obviously quite an unequal treaty, but it is the best that can be expected from a nation as powerful as Eridan's own. Finally, Primarch Gia seems to have had designs on the Kortosian Minotaurs. As I mentioned in my tour of the coins, he once promoted an oracle called Noir Spiritskin to the position of Minotaur Prince of Absalom as a reward for intervening in his favor in a dockside tussle. This title is honorary to be sure, yet Spiritskin possesses an intelligence beyond many of his kin, which he may yet use in an effort to influence or even unite the island's tribes. An Absalomian legion of Minotaurs would be a terrifying thing to behold, so perhaps it is for the best that the Pathfinder Society has been keeping him close under watch. Well, I think that just about concludes my exposition on the Minotaurs. I hope you have learned something today, and if you want the chance to see one in person, your best bet is to come with me on my tours of Kortos and beyond. I am now going to make my way to the Sally Port, thence to head westwards towards the small lumber settlement called Otari. Along the way, I will be discussing Absalom's outskirt settlements and the immediate wasteland that rings the city like a halo. That blasted landscape is called the Cairnlands, and its history is one twinned with violence and siege warfare. It is really quite fascinating and makes for a stunningly sudden contrast to the jewel of civilization that we have been exploring on this side of the walls. Meet me by the Sally Port in Westgate in about an hour, and we can depart Absalom proper together. Well, until then.